what I'm, thank you. What I'm presenting today is both difficult and new for me. Feels new. Recent weeks, we have been looking at how we handle truth in the world, how we are in the world truthfully. I guess I'll use that expression. And I have been saying that truth is difficult and secrets are a burden. And we've looked at transparency, script lines, and straight messages, all in a particular way of mine, not David's. And that will emerge as we get into this. Yes, I think I am more a practitioner. David was more a thinker. And I think that because what I'm presenting here is mine, not his. And I guess I always have trouble with that. It's always easier for me to present Dave's material than present my own. I don't quite know why. I guess something about the caring life force. But what I'm presenting here is that there is an inherent morality in passive listening and in the several levels of the listening. The morality I want to develop, this is really new material, and I found myself writing a piece on it in my writing that came out that, I use the truth line, I'm not saying we've only got a tiny little bit of the truth, to keep us honest. It's about sort of honesty and integrity and issues of power and all that. And I found myself in a different way. We've only got a little bit of the truth, and I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I felt a comfort in only having a little bit of the truth. Because, I'm not that sure about this, and yet on another level I am. So I'm saying there's an inherent morality in passive listening in the 7 levels of this listening. And I think that morality emerges in the sequence of the 7 levels. And I think while it emerges that way, I think in some way that I'm still struggling to get at, I think it's deeply embedded in passive listening. That morality is that people come first, that there is an essence of goodness in everyone, as there is a strength and health. So it's a people-oriented morality. It is not coming from an external set of rules, whether those external set of rules are religious or coming from a profession, say. That there is an essential essence of goodness in everyone, as there is strength and health. Strength and health first could, I believe, be called the most underestimated tool in our toolbox. I think that status also reflects on the fact that the morality question has in no way been sufficiently addressed in Pell. So I'm sort of trying to struggle to get at. This hopefully is new material and work in progress. It is super related to the times in which we live now and the issues we all face now. In a parallel, although not similar way, the idea, it parallels the Pelham lift. The idea of the Pelham lift was to offer a serious helping hand when we were all being hammered, and by the way, all over the world, by COVID and all it meant, and still does. I believe we also face issues of morality now in a way that hammers us, because as like never before, the right decisions, the moral decisions I'm saying, literally can mean whether we survive or not. I think that's new. I don't think we the people, we human beings, will be making decisions that will affect our death or our survival. That has obviously been the case in I'm wrong there, because that in fact had been the case throughout human history, but they weren't on such a, to coin the phrase, global scale. You know, the whole globe wasn't threatened, just one nation and how one nation could dominate or destroy another nation, or try and destroy races. You know, whether it was those in America who wanted to destroy one way or another the black race, or those in Germany who one way or another wanted to destroy the human race, the Jewish race. So bringing this back to listening, which makes it a little more grounded and practical. And because I think it's not just that I believe there's a morality in passive listening and the 7 levels of listening. I want to make it explicit. I'm trying to do something with Pelham so it has a very overt, a very in the world morality. This is what we stand for. And passive listening in that sense, which is central to our work, is also central to our morality, central to the way we are going to look at issues of good and bad, issues of ethics. And I think there is an attempt at goodness through any form of meditation or any form of religion. And this is where, pardon me, I'm just getting in tissue. This is where over time, I'll need other people's help on this one, that's for sure. I think that a whole bunch of us have sort of ducked this question. I think Dave ducked it a bit. I think of all the strata, the least well-defined is awareness strata. And some people, and I think he ducked it because he did not want to be called a guru. He did not want to be called a cult figure. And I think he was correct to do that, because that could have easily come in. And he was pretty vulnerable. You know, if someone wanted to put some sort of negative label on him, you know, he didn't have a lot of organizations, professions, or universities backing him up. Okay, he was on his own, and I think he thought it would be very dangerous from him if someone could sort of label his eccentric guru who, so he called himself philosopher, which is pretty safe. So I think he ducked the issue of morality for some reason in there, although he gave us, and he certainly gave me as the person who had to carry the torch, put it simply, all the tools to get at it. From strata to valuation strata to, attraction of hurt and callousing. I mean, attraction, hurt, and callousing is on one level a tool. I think one of the most sophisticated ideas around, one of the most sophisticated pieces of theory around to look at how evil develops. It's quite, it's a very strong piece of intellectual material. Maybe I'll put it that way. But he didn't quite, and then evaluating in terms of hurt, it's right there. My contribution from hurt is another one. Okay, we'll take that which is evil and smelly and shitty as compost can be, and we'll turn it into something positive. So, the word I started with here, there's an inherent, I think, morality in it, but we haven't made it explicit. And then there's a whole lot of stuff in I think I would call I know in working around foster carers in particular, I've done quite a bit of analysis and writing, not readily available writing, about what I could call the inspectorate culture, and the inspectorate culture, which is the bureaucratization of professions. There's a lot of thought and work to be done on this, but it's how, on one level, it's how the state can dilute talent, because the state is concerned to survive. Pardon this bit of political science. The state is concerned to survive. Any large organization is concerned. Any bureaucracy is concerned to survive. Anything as big as the Catholic Church is concerned to survive. So method developed over time, and this is where Dave was terrific on callousing, methods develop over time that are put in place, by good people with, people with experience, people with talent, caring, a good heart, ability to listen, in terms of what I'm first introducing today, in terms of this issue of morality and passive listening. And yet the nature of what I call bureaucracy, in a very wide sense, the nature of large organizations, whether they're the state, the churches, the schools, behind what I'd call the goodness is the need that the organization will bring in. Niebuhr, if I'm pronouncing it right, best book. He was a philosopher who Martin Luther King studied very deeply, and his philosophy had a lot of influence on Martin Luther King, as it did on the humanistic psychology movement. And he talked about moral man and immoral society. So society will almost inherently become immoral, just because of the nature of society. Some of us would say the nature of the state, although then there's a bit of a problem. How do you fit in the Catholic Church or now Facebook? Okay, the large organizations become immoral. I think almost from a political science point of view, Facebook is probably going to be a classic study of that. And when we bring that back to passive listening, a quick sort of flip, if you allow me to do it, and in passive listening, I have a responsibility to listen to you, just you, okay? Not my thoughts, not my survival, not the survival organization, but I have to listen to you. So a whistleblower goes to, because Facebook has its same day in business circles, it's called compliance. That's the right word, isn't it, Nikki? Because in another place, you know the word.
Yeah.
Compliance, yeah. They have a compliance department. You have to, and people's job is to, those people's jobs is to make sure the organization is complying with the morality which it claims it has, okay? And yet, from the Catholic Church to Facebook, to the state, certainly to political parties, those places become corrupt or weakened. They're often very, very weak. And you have what I called the inspectorate, at times I call it the inspectorate mentality or the inspectorate ethos. And what that is going in and looking where mistakes might be made that would threaten the organization. And the people who are doing it, they're good people. And they're often the people who are the inspectors are often very skilled, talented. They've had good careers. They're seen as senior in their profession. But they become the Russian play about this, isn't there, by Gogol, I think. Might have the pronunciation wrong there. They're going in, how could this person make a mistake that could threaten the organization? Okay. They go in, that's their intention. That becomes their intention over time. They become calloused to the hurt they are causing by not being able, what I said here, not being able to focus on strength and health first. Mary.
Well, I'm thinking a lot about my visit to Denise yesterday, who I wasn't supposed to visit. I was supposed to retain my power as a marriage and family therapist and not, not give her.
Sorry, Mary, I missed a word. You were not.
I wasn't supposed to visit her within the so-called.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I was supposed to retain my power and not give her acknowledgement for the strength and contribution she's made. I mean, I can't, it's too many personal details if to say them, but she turned from somebody who couldn't do anything into somebody with more than, on the way to her second graduate degree and owning her own house. And I mean, just the most incredible level of accomplishment. And I chose to go and see her house and tell her what a mess the conventional way is, because it was right, morally right, really. I hadn't thought of the word. It was right for me to, having shared my own difficulties and to share her success, and for the first time, I felt like that she was growing in it. That sounds a bit patronizing. I don't mean it in a patronizing way. For the first time, I saw the being two humans together with some kind of friendship, and that meant something to her, and it meant something to me, and I was transparent about it. And I said, and I just told her I didn't think it was right that this was not something that was allowed to come out of the deep relationship we had through helping to heal her. But because we just deal with power so differently. She knew I
Yeah,
knew what it felt like to not be able to get out of bed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and not be able to shower. It makes a big
yeah,
difference to the power dynamics, a really big difference that she knew I shared those things.
yeah. I wanted to say a couple of things about that, and some of this, because you're the reason I was there. But first, I want to sort of stay on the material, like stay on my lesson plan. But then I want to talk about the personal side of it with her. Yeah, that's what I call the bureaucratic, the inspectorate mentality. Because I feel what the inspector mentality says is that if a therapist is friends with a client, there's a possibility something could go wrong, okay? So let's cut out all of that. It could go wrong because the professional person might misuse the power they have in the relationship of friendship and do something that's exploitive. I mean, so it's inspecting to see if something could go wrong. I mean, the parallel is someone could die, and it's that time of year in England, and people do die, and people are going to get injured because we have fireworks on bonfire night. So let's cut out fireworks altogether. Cynthia.
Yeah, I hope I just want to bring something in that it's part of the own research that I'm doing for the book I'm working on. But one of the things that I agree. I mean, I'm not trying to contradict, but one of the things that has happened in society over the past several hundred years is that academic thought has been moved more and more towards quantity rather than quality. And what that means is when you're treating it as quantity, every piece is seen to be the same. So basically, yes, this could happen in a situation, but there's in it with the scientific method. I mean, I'm not anti-science, but it's a big problem with the scientific method because you're treating it, well, I won't go into all this, but you're treating everything as if it's the same. You want a big sample size. You're looking for statistical differences. What's being cut out of that is qualitative. And qualitative, looking at individual situations, being able to see that everything is not the same. And, I mean, in some in traditional thought, actually in India, when I've been studying Indian astrology, one of the interesting things that I just really like about it, when I was learning about Indian electional astrology, which is figuring out the proper time to do something, they treat every moment of time as different. It's a different, this second is different from the next second, and this and the whole, and which I actually like, I've actually using that method now more, is that the idea is that you want to do it, that every minute is not the same. Every minute has its own quality, and every person has their own quality. And I think, I don't know if this goes, but when you're passive listening, you're not coming in with an idea this person has a diagnosis, so everything they say is confirming the diagnosis you've set. And this and a person is a diagnosis. Like, even like sometimes when you talk about Bill and I mean, my one objection is like, no, if you consider a disease, no, I'm not a disease. I'm a person with this. I'm not a diabetic.
Yeah.
But but that whole. So I don't know if this adds to the discussion or not, but it's something I wanted to bring in. Thank you.
Well, I think it adds to the discussion further down the line, and this is some of what I'm struggling with, because I think there is something about passive listening. Well, first up, there's absolutely something about passive listening, that we are postponing diagnosis. I mean, that, and I think that is a moral position, that this person, unique like nobody else in the world, and therefore cannot be counted with everybody else in the world. In Palin is heard, okay, before we give them a diagnosis and put a number on it. And that was very important to me, because where this started was me questioning diagnosis, which was something I was very good at, and which I literally made my reputation on. I've talked about that before, because I worked in a prison where both the treatment side and the custodial side, the people who had university degrees and the people who had carried keys, both gave me a lot of recognition for my diagnosis, okay? And then I came in a very shy way, because I never told anybody, I don't think, maybe, and we loved the work, and there were a group of us who just loved the work. And, we loved talking shop, we used to call it, just loved it. At that time I said, if you got the right job, you don't need a vacation. I was really into the work. But I was a bit shy about presenting my deeper ideas. And that's where I think it was not just my shyness, but there's something in the helping professions that sort of ducked the moral question. They couldn't quite handle one. So you can't, and it became very clear, you can't say someone is a good parent or a bad parent. That's a judgment, and you're disempowering the client by saying that, etc. You mustn't say you can help, because that's disempowering. You mustn't say you're a leader, because that's disempowering. And yet they didn't put anything in place of it, okay? And you certainly couldn't say you helped, because that was also disempowering. So that, that led to a lot of my work about language, as you know, and words, vocabulary. But this other one, looking back on it, I think it's been ducked a lot. Why can't we be a group of people? And I think we it's one of the reasons we're not taken very seriously. Very sadly. I feel the helping professions and the therapeutic arts and sciences, I call them. I think they have a huge amount to offer in the world. I think it's been a huge progress in human knowledge. But I feel because we do some of the things I'm sort of talking about now, and it's a persona gap. You know, the psychiatric profession's perception of themselves and the world's perception of the psychiatric profession, and what's the gap there? And, you know, I think because, anyway, that will reduce clarity if I go down that particular path here. But I think some of that path is important about why is this coming up now and why didn't it come up before, and me being a bit transparent about that. I knew I was right way back when. You know, I knew that just because I could provide very accurate assessments and diagnosis didn't necessarily mean that that was of any use to the guy serving time in prison. You know, and I looked at what helped someone not come back to prison, what helped someone be rehabilitated, and I came to the view that the diagnosis didn't help that much, even though the diagnosis was mine. Okay, and I really did have a reputation then. There was some very high profile case. It got to a ministerial level, and this was before, you know, this was way before, you know, the computers. So files were paper files. So, you know, there was a big fat file about a case that had hit the press. And the minister picked it up and said, I've read this, and the only thing that makes sense, and threw the big thing on a table, said the only thing that makes any sense is what Peter Fleming wrote 3 years ago. Yeah, that was sort of nice. I'm not denying it wasn't nice. But, you know, where does my struggle with, where does the diagnosis fit with helping somebody change? And I realized that it was it didn't quite. And of course, at that time, there was research, because I guess some of the issues I'm looking at probably were raised most effectively, I think, by Carl Rogers. On a practitioner level, Martin Buber on a philosophical level. And Carl Rogers himself conducted this research project, 3 groups of people, professionals, housewives, who people went to with their problems, pardon the expression, housewives, but that's what it was, and people selected at random. In terms of achieving change, the housewives were way ahead, and the other 2 were sort of equal. Okay. It was, you know, and that was coming from Carl Rogers, not from, you know, some fringy person. Of course, Carl Rogers was absolutely mainstream. So, you know, what we have to offer the world, we haven't done the best with. And I think in this material, because I think we've ducked issues, and people see us ducking issues. I mean, you know, as you know, transparency came from this particular person, my transparency. My theory of transparency came from this particular person who was very famous in America called Saul Alinsky, saying to a group of us who he was training, he was the father of community organization, and in a sense, the father of the career that Barack Obama first went into as a community organizer. And I know I've told the story before, but if I can be brief, Saul Alinsky said, well, you've all got problems and you hide them. Therefore, who the hell are you to go around saying you can help people? That was a challenge to us. And put very, expressed, the challenge was better than I've expressed it. And therefore, you all should become community organizers. And I knew I didn't have the talent to be community organizers, but literally, you know, that's where my thoughts about transparency came from. And my thoughts about passive, what became passive listening and the 7 levels of listening, because, you know, I don't want to run away from my own skills. You know, in Pelham, as against Gestalt therapy, diagnosis assessment is really important. It just becomes late. It happens later rather than earlier. And I think there is a basic morality in that. Someone comes first as a person, and in some way that I can't quite get at yet and cannot be counted. Yeah, just the same as, I don't know, I'm not a religious person, as you know, but you can't sort of count God's good actions. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in religion. And the counting, there's a particular, I don't know what word to, I can hardly find a strong enough word. But I just use the word bad. There's a really bad bit of counting right at the start of the United States of America. And that was, I think it's 2/3.
3/5.
3/5. Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. Yeah, slaves and Black people are 3/5 of a person. Now, I'll try and find my discipline and not go down all the concepts of that intriguing. Counting was a whole thing about counting. It was a whole thing about counting electoral college electors so the South could dominate the nation and slavery would not be questioned. 3/5, 3/5. And I think with passive listening, we're saying this unique person, this person is unique and comes before everything. Just comes before everything. And therefore, we start with Pelham, and this is a bit, it's going to take me some weeks to get on top of it. But, Pelham starts with inherent morality. It starts with a inherent look at ethical questions, okay? And I don't know how you'd like to come in, Cease, but I think there's something there that's close to what the Quaker Church was. I'm not a Quaker, I don't know that much about it, but I think there was something there that we will look at the hardest issues. We will look at the moral issues. We just won't say, I don't know, because I believe in the Bible, and because my ministry gives me the interpretation of the Bible I believe in, therefore it's okay to be a slave owner. I mean, that happened. I mean, ministers wrote books about justifying slavery. Cease?
Sure. how that fits in with what you were talking about before. I just know for my work, I have to have a diagnosis because I'm doing competency to stand trial. And they want to know what, based on that condition, how long, what medications might be good if they're sent to the state hospital or another place. They're going to know. Of course, a doctor will also make that determination and give them the factors that are interfering with them being able to stand trial. So I do have to give a diagnosis to make them eligible for that. We don't want them to go to court and be found guilty when they don't understand court. So that's the way mainly I've used it, except for insurance companies, and they really don't care what you put down, as long as you put down something, why you're seeing this person. And then if you're making a referral to a psychiatrist, they're going to want to know what are some of the symptoms the person has. That seems very logical to me in that situation. But if somebody comes in just because, you know, they have some social problems, there's really no reason to diagnose them with some condition. It's to find out what are the problems that they're having, what will be helpful to them. And so there's a place for diagnoses, and there's a lot of place where it's not really needed, as long as you're looking at what are the problems, how can I get resolved or a person get better.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it more than that, but
no, sorry.
So I'm not sure how what I have said fits in with your philosophy, but I don't spend much time worrying about it. If I'm wrong, somebody will correct me. I actually have a case right now where I don't know what I should put down, and then I can just put rule out. Like, I don't have to be clear. I can say somebody else look at this person and figure out what they think. So the label doesn't matter as much as what the issues are that the person is facing, in my view. Yeah,
that's it's interesting you put it that way, because that's really where where my work started, because I guess they saw I could be useful to them, the prison. So they gave me the job of writing all the treatment plans, everyone who came in. And they were long, they were the equivalent of a case history or pre-sentence report, all those things. And I don't quite know where I took the confidence, but I said I'd do it as long as I could write it my way and I didn't use any psychological or psychiatric words. This was in a very radical time, you know, a lot of change around 1961, 62, 63. You know, there was a lot of feistiness within the professions. And I said, they were called trainees, not prisoner. I wanted to write it in a language that the trainee could understand. So I dumped all the words and said, you know, this person makes up things to be afraid of and suspects everyone and can, because of that, become violent. That's just me, rather than using the word paranoid, I describe it. And that was accepted. So it's interesting to sort of go back to that, but one of the ways I feel you crucially, I want to use that word, useful to me now, is you're inside the system. I'm not. And it's really good to hear this stuff, because one thing that changed my view on diagnosis and psychiatrist laying down the diagnosis was Doonesbury. You know, it sort of saved BJ's life, probably, and possibly Boopsy's as well, if anyone follows Doonesbury, that he got a diagnosis. And that really, you know, he got told he had PTSD and he got told what it was, and it really helped him. It helped him reach, it really helped him reach out. And, you know, that's a comic strip, but, and that particular, because I got it off, you know, I got it off Amazon, right? And it's really a sort of small book of just on BJ at those times, when he came back from Iraq, and, you know, he was, you know, sleeping with a gun under his pillow and frightening his little daughter and all of that. It's just quite a limited time in the, you know, publication of the comic strip. And it was published by a vets organization with a introduction by a general, just asking people to read what BJ and his family went through. And, you know, I happened accidentally to order it. And I could see clearly the place of the diagnosis, the place of the diagnosis, and the diagnosis coming from a psychiatrist who also had a uniform and a very high rank. And it helped them get help because they could, I guess, have a way to explain it to themselves. I have PTSD.
That's a good example, because everybody seems to know what PTSD is and know what some of the symptoms are. And it does help people who experience PTSD to be able, it helps them understand that they're not like a crazy person. There's a reason why they have these symptoms, and it was brought on by something else. It's not a character flaw. It's not those kind of things. So that diagnosis, and the same we're finding out about most of the other mental health problems, that there's a lot of outside factors that impact people. So I think that can be helpful if people can understand that you don't have, you may have those symptoms now, you may not have them, you know, 6 months from now. It's just a collection of symptoms is what it is. It's not a death sentence. It's not a thing you have to wear around your foot. It's, so I think that can be helpful if people explain what those symptoms are, why they have them. And like you said, it's a way to get your insurance to pay for your treatment. Looks like Elizabeth.
Hi.
Elizabeth.
Hi. So would it be fair to say that the mental health profession as it stands right now often treats diagnosis as the goal, and what Pelham is saying is it is one tool in the box?
I don't know that many people consider that to be the goal, to find the diagnosis. If you're getting care, that's the starting point, not the end point.
I mean, not necessarily the experience other people I know have dealing with it.
Yeah, that's not good. Then that's not I'm sorry that happened to them.
Cynthia.
Yeah, I mean that one of the things that's interesting listening, and it's one of my things that's frustrating, but one of the reasons talking about bureaucracy is one of the ways you need a diagnosis in order to get things paid for. I mean, I mean, and I understand on a practical level, yes, I mean, you want things paid for and you want things, but there's something, and it's the same thing, and it's the same thing in physical health too, that there's a control that bureaucracy has, money interests have, in making it so and when I was a special ed teacher, this was an issue then too, making sure that there has to be a label in order to justify. And yes, there's a good, I mean, I understand there are some very good reasons to have a label, but outside the profession, and some labels have more stigma than others. You have a label of a PTSD because you were in war, or a label of, I forget what, complex PTSD because you were the victim of incest for years. That's going to be different how it's perceived, whatever the professions are doing. You've also, there's also something that what lay people think, or God forbid you're borderline or bipolar, and then bringing that diagnosis to friends and family who don't have all the sophistication and who don't have, I mean, I know, my father was diagnosed as schizophrenic and I never met him. And there's just, and it was explained to me by my mother, who had a lay person's of understanding of it, which may or may not have been accurate. I don't know. I mean, there's something about it that I can see the point, and I see people struggling with it, but there's also this bureaucracy, talking about the bureaucratization. In order to get paid for, in order to get treatment, you have to have a label to justify it. And that's something, and I don't think that's coming from the psychiatrist or the psychologist, who really probably just want to help people and do good for people. It's coming from insurance and bureaucracy, and I don't know, it's I mean, one of my big pet peeves and why I get so frustrated with the medical, with even going to a doctor, is that I mean, I think my doctor's actually decent person, but I know he's got to follow the standard of care according to what the insurance requires in order to get it paid for. And while there's a practicality to it, it's, I don't know, sorry about my going off on one of my soapboxes.
That's sort of very relevant. Just to stay on that, but just to bring it historically, there was a movement to get rid of the labels, and it was created by Thomas Satz, and a lot of us were behind him. And Carl Rogers was, there was a lot of movement against what, I always forget the letters for the system in America. What do they call, Mary?
The
No,
DSM. So what do you mean?
Yeah, is that the one? Yeah. And actually, I don't know if you remember, Nikki, but you and I were at the graduation ceremony. What was her name? What was her colleague and friend's name way back? The one who
Yeah, the one, you mean the woman who stood up all sparkly, made a speech, or the,
Yeah, no, who was our friend?
Oh,
Why were we there? Philippa, thank you. Yeah, Philippa was graduating. She'd studied Pellon, and she'd also got a parallel MA degree at a university, a very good university called Regent's College. Anyway, Mickey and I were there at Philippa's graduation. Sat was a guest speaker, okay, which is a big thing. You know, he was a giant in the field. And he just stood up and said, we lost. I remember it very, very clearly. He just said, we lost. The others won. And it won't turn around. It won't go our way. All the psychiatric diagnosis will have the power there. I don't think it was called DSM back then. I think it might have been called something different. I can't remember. And I stood up and said, well, some of us are still fighting that fight. But he said, well, he looked at me and said, well, we lost. You got to face it, we lost. And he was the leader of that movement to not have the psychiatric labels. I mean, that's just factual history. And I guess as we develop this, what I want to call the morality of our listening material, the morality inherent in our listening material, because it has now, I understand, the word is, two words I think are very relevant here. One is things becoming bureaucracies, and the other one is the nature of institutionalization. And in Pellant, we look at that in terms of, we use the tool of callosing to look at both institutionalization and bureaucratization. And I guess I think over time, probably saying the institutionalization of professions, but I think we wanted some other words there that I haven't got yet. But you can see that in the legal professions. You know, the legal professions, you know, they have their ethics and ethical compliance factors in their profession. But with the institutionalization of the profession, people can just, as a lawyer, and in America, a lawyer is, if I'm right, Cynthia, a servant of the court.
Yes.
That's
An
correct.
Officer of the court, yes.
You're an officer of the court. And yet the callousing means that people who have that responsibility can try to overturn an election. I mean, that is a very major bit of history, apart from anything else, history being made in a time, you know, it's fearful. It's just fearful.
Yeah. Well, the reason they're talking about being the off, and that's a little bit separate from, I think, what happened in the Supreme Court, and that's, and that's a whole nother story altogether. But part of the reason you're an officer of the court is to is to clarify one of the things, because you're supposed to fight for your client, you're supposed to advocate for your client within the bounds of the law, which there's problems with that too. But you're an officer of the court, so which means so that's really helpful as a lawyer, so you know where your duties lie. That's why there's certain things, and you tell your client there's certain things I can't advocate. Like when I was a divorce lawyer, I could not even argue, even if my client asked me, even my client ordered to me, advocate for something that I believed, that in my heart I felt would be not in the best interest of the child. So I could refuse, like if somebody you also are not allowed to lie on behalf of your client. So I mean, so that's sort of that really helps define, and I guess it's part of what could go wrong. But as a lawyer, particularly when you're up against, when you're supposed to be going to the bounds of the law, you really need to have it very clear what that law is and where you're supposed to go. And it also meant, as an officer of the court, I could be ordered to represent somebody whether or not I was being paid, or the judge, which did this frequently, would say, you're sitting there, these two people don't have any representation, can you write the order? Can you come up and write the order? And any lawyer who was in there could be called up to do that. So, so it was kind of but I think that's kind of separate from what was going on with, that's at a much, much higher level than most lawyers are dealing with.
I realize that, but I guess what I'm struggling with, and I don't just want to put it on profession, but probably struggling with talking about something like the callousing that happens to professions, and how that, I think, how that can prevent some of the best stuff happening, and particularly can, I'm searching for a word, flatten. It can really flatten magnificent native talent. I've seen that, and I've got a good example. I saw it, and back in the very innovative days when Pellin was developing, I can't remember his name for a moment, but a very, very influential thinker in education wrote a book called The De-Skilling, and took the point of view that the training you go through, the training teachers go through could de-skill them, could take away some of their, I'm calling native talent here. And then, many decades later, literally decades later, and I was surprised, a friend of mine, mutual friend of a bunch of us here, and colleague, Nash, set up a fostering agency, and she had trained with me before she set it up, and in some ways set it up on the basis of her training with me. But I wasn't involved with the foster carers at that stage. I was involved with supporting Nasha, who was setting this up. The first Black fostering agency in London, which was a big deal. But I didn't know foster carers. And then when she wanted me to start, and Nikki did as well, start training foster carers, then I got to know them. And to be quite frank, I was blown away by the talents some of them have. I'm not saying everybody, I'm not naive about it. There can be evil in fostering, but my God, some of the talent. And it was, so some of what I'm looking at here is, coming from sort of that experience. And the talent was recognized, okay? And it brings me back to, I want to try and stay on theme bit, but I do want to also, you can bear with me to go on a bit, I want to talk about the person you were talking about, Mary. Because I was in the court building anyway when some of that case was heard. I want to mention that. Going back to fostering, people like social workers and senior social workers, managers, even judges would and they would use this an expression that really happened a lot. I don't know how Gwen does it. The work Gwen does is just great. I couldn't do that. That is often said about foster care. It's never put on paper, okay? And And that's where I want to come back and at least
Sorry,
address.
Peter, did you say it's never put on paper?
Yeah,
No,
never put
no.
on paper. Yeah. And I could, and you know, by the time I met foster carers, I was really experienced in my field of work. And I could see the terrific work they did. But they're inspected. Then this is where, you know, I developed my idea of the inspectorate ethos. The inspector has to go in and it's risk assessment and what could go wrong. And the talent that this particular person has as a foster carer to change somebody's life, and this is why I'm pretty passionate about that, and couldn't have pendulum swings. I've got to be a bit careful. I could see it, Mary.
No, I'm sorry.
Please.
I was saying goodbye to Cease because she said she has to
Yeah,
leave.
I got to get back to work. Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I saw it. I saw it. And I saw it not being recognized. And yeah, they're people by now I've known a long time, one way or another.
Okay. Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
What at the beginning, when you were speaking at the beginning, you're kind of focusing more on the positive, you like, and like how you could recognize. I can't quite remember the different things you said, but you sort of ran some of the Penning tools through the eyes of seeing how they were moral and encouraging goodness and being able to recognize badness. And I feel like that's the conversation we never had before. And this is a conversation we have had before. And I feel a bit disappointed. I know there's plenty of time to go on developing it, but I feel like that's where the value, for me, that's where the value in what you're saying lies, that excitement, because that's saying we're going to continue the war whether you like it or not, even if it's been lost in terms of overall power. We've got this, we're going to be brave, and we're going to talk about the fundamental human issues of what's good and how, because what you were saying at the beginning is how we could use our tools to recognize huge philosophical issues that are not addressed or recognized other than to inspectorate them in other forms of therapy. And so that's like a really, you know, it's new, so maybe it's kind of easy to not go there, if you like, because you're still thinking it through. But it's like, that's an amazing contribution that we could make by recasting things in that light. And that's what I was, you know, I'm still pretty tired from the overnight drive, but it's kind of what I was getting at about Denise. Yeah,
let me come in there quickly. And it's Sunday, isn't it? Yeah. So I'm glad that's being recorded. And I'm sorry Cease is missing this bit. But I wasn't in the courtroom, but I was in the court building when Denise's case was being heard. And the case was whether Denise could keep her daughter. How old was she then, Mary? 8?
probably
6? Anyway, she was a little girl. I reckon she was 7 or 8. And the reason I'm telling you, and I just happened to be there because I was visiting Mary, and you know, she said, "Could you come along and give us some support?" And I'm happy to do that. The reason I want to tell the story is Denise wasn't handling herself very well. She got hysterical. The court appointed attorney for the county of LA, with a very experienced man. You know, he'd been this person. He came up to me, and because I think I dressed up a little bit or something, so, and I was very quiet, so he didn't know who I was. So I came up and said, "Oh, who are you?" And I explained to him what I did, and he said, "Oh, could I talk to you a minute?" And sort of pulled me away. And he said, you've got to agree, don't you, that that child has a better chance of a life if she's taken away from her mother. I mean, this guy really leaned into me with this opinion. That's why I want to tell the story here. And I mean, I guess it's only one incident, but that to me, and he was obviously a clever man, an established man, but the whole concept of sort of callousing, not because he had a chance to ask me what I thought about Denise. He wasn't interested in what I thought about Denise. He was interested in me seeing the threat to the child, and therefore the child must be removed. And I think within that, there's something about what I'm trying to get at, the morality, the ethics of passive listening. And it is the, and the other example I want to give quickly, because I know fostering. I know my field of work, I've been in it a long time. But I also know drug addiction. I've got some expertise there, some reputation, drug addiction, alcoholism. And this whole new force from the state, from the established, I guess establishment maybe is the best word to use. I'm looking for a word that covers, universities, the state, the churches, the big churches, and the universities. I haven't got one. Anyway, in philosophical literatures, it's called the individual against the state, but this is, it's been the individual against the Catholic Church, for Christ's sake. I mean, that's been the tragic one. Centuries and centuries and centuries, the church would not passive listen. Everyone knew what was going on. Child abuse. I've lost my way a little bit there. Just give me a moment. Yeah, it's kind. Oh yes, opioid crisis. I mean, if you go into cases about the opioid crisis, it's just tragic. There's no other case for it. It's just tragic. I mean, people get on the drugs because they had a car accident or a cop got seriously wounded in a gunfight doing his job, and they had pain. So they got diagnosed this thing that took away the pain, but it was incredibly, there was an incredible danger of people becoming addicted to opioid. Cynthia.
Well, and that's a case in point. Oh dear. Okay, that's a case in point, though, of things that go wrong, because there's people, including my spouse, who live with chronic pain, who've got some sort of debilitating injuries, rheumatoid arthritis, who need painkillers, to function.
Yeah.
And they have to go through, because it's abused by some and because there's problems. There are people who actually need it for pain. Yes, they're dependent on it, but they're dependent on a painkiller. The pain is stable. It's just because it can go wrong in this instant. Everybody who's on them is treated the same way.
Well, it's interesting you said that. Now, thank you so much for that. Let's hold on to that, because treated the same way. That might be one of the crux issues, because I think we've got with passive listening, I want to get to the point where if you're going to be part of Pelham, then you've got to be part of this morality that is best represented by passive listening. Okay. And as I struggle to think it through, I think what passive listening is, you can't treat everyone the same way. It's right there. I think what we get in passive listening, and perhaps what some of the morality is at least, is to get at the goodness of people. You've got to see how they're different from each other and how someone is uniquely themselves. I think we're saying something about that. Cynthia, I just want to say one thing for just the opioid thing quickly. I'll try and make it really brief. What has happened is that the university has taken over, and two things, you must have a master's degree and you must provide very quickly a DSM diagnosis. And if you're not doing that in the state of Ohio, you're acting professionally unethically if you're not providing a quick diagnosis. I mean, that's from Nan. I just wanted to put that out, and there's something about that that's about callousing. Power to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. And I think when we get into it over and over again, it's callousing. The people who are enforcing those rules and squeezing out people whose expertise in the field is not from a university degree, but because they've been through that process, okay? Yeah, they're ex-addicts, ex-drunks, and they're some of the best workers in the field, but it's taken over that other way. And that's something about this is a new phrase for me, the almost potential evil that in large organizations who inevitably, almost against their own beliefs, inevitably get pulled into protecting the organization rather than being concerned with the individuals. And if I take that boldly, because into the South, the thing was to protect slavery against any issues of individuality. And the calluses that came in there. And then, of course, the great Thomas Jefferson had 7 children with a slave, Sarah Hemings. Cynthia, you were going to say something before we start.
I don't want to. Okay, I was just saying it's something that actually, even though I've had, I didn't keep doing it, but there is something proud of the work I did when I was a lawyer. And it was something about that. It wasn't systematic, but it was the way that it was sort of the culture in the family law community or whatever that that the idea was as much as possible. And if you could, and the only way to do this was if you could get people to agree, because if people could agree, they could craft things however they wanted, where if you were just having it handed down from the judge, you have to follow what was allowed in the law. And the idea was, and the ethos came from the judges, it came all around the whole area, is that, you know what, the parents are the people who are in the best position to decide what's best for their children, not the lawyers, not the judge. And and judges would say this, judges would say, listen, I'm not this child's mother, I'm not this child's father. I want you to make the decision, otherwise I'm going to have to. And, it's much better if you make this decision because you're their parents. And that whole ethos was, I liked that. I mean, that was one of the things I did like about it.
Yeah. No, and there's such a there's because I've helped someone. I helped someone do really well in education, and because I'd been through divorces, I had the thing on the tip of my tongue: the child comes first. Okay, and this person who I was helping with this could go to things like, well, inspect in England it's called Ofsted. That's the inspectorate agency. Meetings with the inspectorate agency or meetings with what here are called school governors. And when everything got all toxic, could stand back and say, oh, what's best for the children? What's best for the, and not many people ask that question in education. It was really funny. They got pulled into all this sort of policy stuff and things. I can say more about that another time because I think it's relevant, sort of callous. And he could just say, what's best for the children here? What's best? And even saying it sort of casually, what's best for the kids? And it was a odd sort of, and I took it, where I took it from was what you're just saying, what's best for the children. It's routine in divorce. It's a cliche. It's not in education. They almost don't often say it. And he could just win all these things in these meetings because he could say, well, what's best for the children here? Quite slowly. What are you talking about, children? We're talking about, section 1A2. Anyway, there's something about that that's also passive, as we're ending. There's something about that. I can't quite get it yet, where I think passive listening is crucial. And I think we could say it emerges at times. Yeah, let me just say one thing that I want to share this. So I've got it all inside me with this struggle. Because with my philosophy group, have you heard me talk about, they have a really slick way, and I've seen this before. They quote some philosopher who said, well, the trouble with common sense is it's not very common. And everyone laughs. And they quote who said it, who's some eminent academic philosopher. And, boom, wipe it all out with that one clever statement. I saw it, well, it happened to me in this group. So I think we can say something like, we'll stop in a minute. With passive listening, you can't do that. I think we can say there's something empirical. The trouble with common sense is it's not very common. And everyone laughed. Everyone knows the quote. Everyone goes back to their comfort zone, which is studying academic philosophy. And of course, you can imagine my trouble with that because that wipes out David Pellin. And it wipes out everything I talk about. And it also, by the way, wipes out AA. And I think there's something about all of that happens with calluses, and that takes out the moral question of looking at individuality. Anyway, we got to stop. Thank you for coming because, well, as you can tell, it's an important one for me. And I'm in Norfolk in England where it is now pitch dark and just after 7:30. Nikki.
Yep, I'm in Wimbledon, also just after 7:30.
Cynthia.
Cynthia, it's Kankakee, Illinois, and it's just after 1:30.
Okay, Mary.
I'm Mary in Topanga, California, and it's just after 11:30.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming. And on Wednesday, I guess I want to continue this for some time, and then a bit down the way, combine it with transparency, script lines, and straight messages, because I think probably coming out of today, I need some script lines, right? So I really need some script lines, and I don't have them. Yeah. Okay.